This is the one the military loves. So we're going to start, okay?
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Donald Trump was handing out medals to soldiers,
Illegal border crossings have plummeted to the low.
talking about immigration and fentanyl.
Trafficking fentanyl into the United States.
There was nothing to tee up this media bombshell.
In a little while, you'll be seeing I'm suing the BBC for putting words in my mouth, literally. They put words in my mouth.
Suing Britain's national broadcaster for $10 billion.
They actually put terrible words in my mouth having to do with January 6th that I didn't say.
Actually, he did say them on January the 6th, 2021.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and I'll be there with you, and we fight. We fight like hell.
The controversy was that BBC Panorama had stitched together two sections.
Here, we're going to walk down to the Capitol, and we're going to cheer on our brave senators and congressmen and women.
They were more than 50 minutes apart.
And we fight. We fight like hell.
Trump's lawyers are accusing the broadcaster of defaming the president and of deliberately doctoring the speech to interfere with the next 2024 election campaign when it aired. The BBC has apologised for an erroneous edit but says it will fight this case, lodged in Florida, where Panorama was not even shown. So what do you think Donald Trump is trying to achieve with all of this?
He has a lot of motivations. He is a big media consumer and has been sort of using theatrical fights with the media in this way since the 1980s. But I think, he understands that lawsuits are a form of public relations and are politics by another means.
And if lawsuits are politics, they are a form of politics Trump can't get enough of. He is suing the Wall Street Journal for $10 billion over an alleged Jeffrey Epstein birthday note. The New York Times for $15 billion over claims about his business dealings. While they fight on, others have settled. Paramount Global shelling out $16 million over a Kamala Harris interview Trump said was too positive. ABC News $15 million after an anchor said Trump was found liable for rape instead of civilly liable for sexual abuse. But those are American media giants. The BBC may want to further expand here in the US, and Trump can make life more difficult for its journalists. But ultimately, he has much less commercial sway over a British broadcaster. And BBC insiders also point to the licence fee and argue we cannot spend public money settling with Donald Trump. And besides, experts think they will win.
I do think it's so obviously about speech, and speech is a very established and well-protected body of American law that if the BBC, has the guts, it'll certainly be able to weather this.
This fight with Trump has already cost the BBC a Director General and Head of News. But in many ways, the challenge for Tim Davies and Deborah Tenness's successors might be less about the politics and more about the money.
The vision and sound are on. The station goes on the air.
The tectonic plates of broadcasting are shifting, and the BBC's massive historic success will not shield it from a new commercial reality.
Traitors remain undetected.
Despite some hugely popular shows, its audience is less faithful than it once was, with licence fee revenues falling by more than £1 billion a year. Today, a Green Paper on charter renewal raises the prospect of advertising or subscriptions. The government says it wants the BBC to survive to the very end, but ministers won't back it against Trump.
What the BBC did in relation to Donald Trump and that programme was wrong and misrepresented what President Trump said. The BBC's apologised for that. President Trump has every reason to be angry about it, and he may well want to proceed with a court case. That's for him to decide and for the BBC to answer.
So a $10 billion lawsuit and a face-off against the US president in court, the Christmas gift nobody wanted. But the BBC insists that on this one, it will not dance to Donald Trump's tune. I thought what we just heard from the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, was incredibly telling because it shows this balancing act that Keir Starmer's government is trying to maintain. That even as Donald Trump rages against Europe in the national security strategy, even as he almost seems to endorse patriotic opposition parties like Reform UK, even when he sues the national broadcaster, they do not want to criticise him. They think our economic and defence links are too important. But look, some critics starting to question that, particularly with news today about our own problems with a trade deal, the news that the US is pausing a potential $40 billion technology deal with the UK.
And Anushka, some interesting revelations from the White House Chief of Staff, Susie Wiles, today. Tell us more about that.
Absolutely fascinating because Susie Wiles is a bit of an enigma. We never hear much about her, but she's done a series of interviews with Vanity Fair and they have published a very interesting set of profile pieces on her. It starts with this amazing meeting where they're talking about national security in the White House and then she stands up to leave and Donald Trump says, "Is there an emergency?" She says, "Yes, there's an emergency and it doesn't involve you." It portrays her as this power broker who basically lets the other pit bull type characters, people like the War Secretary Pete Hegseth, off the lead. She isn't that critical of Donald Trump, but she does at one point say he has an alcoholic's personality, that he can do whatever he wants. She suggests that she has told him to stop the score settling and suggests that he does think that Vladimir Putin wants the whole of Ukraine. Susie Wiles has described this as a hit piece and the White House at the moment are standing by her.
Anushka in Washington, thanks very much indeed. Well, let's talk more about Trump v. the BBC with the CNN's chief media analyst, Brian Stelter. Brian, it's good to have you back on the show. How existential do you in America think this moment is for the BBC?
I look at this and I see President Trump again wielding the courts, trying to punish perceived opponents, trying to chill the independent media. And I think this case says a lot more about Trump than it does about the BBC. Yes, this is going to be a legal headache for the British broadcaster. Yes, this could go on for a while. But I've spoken with numerous legal experts today who say that Trump has a weak case, that this could be thrown out very early in the process, even though the lawsuit's been assigned to a Trump-appointed judge. And keep in mind the broader context here. Up until this year, it was unheard of for any sitting American president to sue a news outlet. It just never happened. Of course, this year, Trump has sued the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and now the BBC. But when news outlets fight in court, they almost always win. And this is probably another one of those examples.
Right, but there are several big news outlets that didn't go to court. They settled before it went to court. And has that created the pitch for the BBC?
100%. It was this week last year that Disney, the parent of ABC, settled with Trump and paid his future presidential library. And that created a domino effect and, frankly, a chilling effect across the American media. Paramount, the parent of CBS, also settled with Trump. And, I think Trump probably learned from those episodes that he could file these suits and try to shake down media companies. That's why it's important the BBC has publicly said that it will fight this lawsuit.
Right. The BBC is almost as famous around the world as David Beckham and the royal family. Why do you think Trump has got it in for the BBC, especially when he loves coming over to Windsor Wonderland and have sleepovers with the royals, and he talks about the special relationship? Why has he gone for the BBC like this?
Two reasons. Number one, he wants to be seen as battling the press. Anytime his advisors, his aides convince him he has a case against a media outlet, he wants to pursue it. He wants to be seen at war with the press, and he wants to chill independent media. I think in this case, it's also about January 6th. Trump has tried to rewrite the history of January 6th. He's tried to memory hole his involvement with the riot. And the BBC program, it brings all that right back to the surface. So it's an attempt for him to proclaim his innocence with regards to January 6th. And that's why yesterday he went really far out and claimed that maybe the BBC used artificial intelligence to put words in his mouth. That did not happen, but there was a bad edit, and that's what this case will now revolve around. And
we also know that the BBC is trying to expand in America. There is BBC America. It's got a much bigger news bureau there now than when I worked for it a decade ago or so. Could he make life difficult for them in America on the ground?
I think around the edges, yes. Let's see if this case actually makes it to trial, though. If this gets thrown out in the early stages, most people will forget about it. If somehow this actually ends up in a courtroom in Florida in front of a Florida jury, then it will be a bigger deal. Then it will be a bigger problem for the BBC. And then billions of dollars really could be at stake. But I was told by media lawyers today, his $10 billion claim is wildly inflated. It'll be very, very hard, probably impossible to actually prove that kind of damage. Let's remember, we're talking about Trump's reputation ultimately, and his reputation, it's not exactly picture perfect.
Well, what you're saying would be music to BBC ears, but they're not here to answer that. Brian Stelter, thank you very much indeed. Thanks, Brian.